Hey guys, so in today's lesson we are going to talk about the 6 literary elements of books. The elements we're going to talk about today are going to be in every book, story, or movie or anything like that that you see or watch. So the 6 elements we're going to be talking about is the conflict, the plot, the characters, the setting, and finally the theme. And today we're going to go through and look at what each of these means, and then I'm going to give you an example of each. And the example story that we're going to use for these is the Cinderella story, one that you probably all know. Okay, the first literary element we are going to take a look at is the setting of the story. Now, the setting is pretty simple. It is where the story takes place. Now, this is going to include 2 different things. It is going to be, 1, the geographical location, but is also going to include when. So, where and when. What time in history did it take place? So, if we were using our example of the Cinderella story, what would we say that the setting of the story is? Now, it doesn't tell us exactly where it is, but you can see that it is probably around the 1900s sometime, because there was kings and queens and castles, and that's not something we have today. And it took place mainly at the castle. So that would be where and when the story took place. Okay, so the second literary element we are going to take a look at is characters. Now, the characters are just simply who is in the story. Characters can be people, which is the most common, or they can be animals, or any other type of made-up person or animal that is in the story. So, if we were looking at our Cinderella story, who would be the different characters? So, obviously our main character is Cinderella herself. Then there's also her stepsisters. And her animal friends. Now, there's some other characters in the book, but these are the main ones that we're going to look at. So when you talk about the characters, you also want to include the age. So Cinderella was about 16 when this story takes place, and her stepsisters are probably about the same, so maybe 16 to 17. And then her animal friends, obviously we don't know their ages, but that's okay, they're still considered characters. And also in characters, you want to talk about the believability of the characters. So Cinderella is a pretty believable character, along with her stepsisters. But the ones that are maybe not as believable are all of her animal friends, because they talk and act like humans even though they're actually animals. So the next one we want to take a look at is style. Now, style is just how the author writes the book. Are they formal, where they use very proper and informative language, or are they informal, where they use slang with how the characters talk? And style can also include what type of book it is, so whether it's a biography or a fairy tale or an informational text, anything like that. And it can also be specific things that the author chooses to do. Some authors do special things like don't use any kind of punctuation or anything like that. It is just the way that the author writes the story. Our fourth literary element is the conflict of the story. Now, there's different types of conflicts in each story. It can be man versus man, man versus nature, or man versus society, or man versus self. So man versus man is when there's 2 characters butting heads. Man versus nature is the main character against any type of threats in nature. Man versus society is when someone's like an outcast and it seems that all of society is against them. And man versus self is an eternal struggle where the person is fighting to figure out who they are. So in Cinderella, we could say that it is one, man versus society, because she is considered to be very poor and more like a slave rather than a princess. And also man versus man as Cinderella fights with her stepsisters, and even man versus self as she struggles with who she is and having respect for herself. All right, our fifth element is theme. Now, the theme is the main point the author is trying to get across in the story. And there usually is a couple of different themes. One of the themes we could say with Cinderella is wealth, as Cinderella's family that she works for is very wealthy, and so is the prince, but that is something that she doesn't have. And we could also say good versus evil, as she struggles to remain good and kind to her evil stepsisters. Our sixth and final element that we look at in books is the plot. Now, the plot is just basically a summary of all the important events that happen in the story. So you leave out the small details, but you include the overall main summary of everything that happened in the story, including the rising action and the climax, and then eventually the solution to what the climax of the story was. Alright guys, so now you've seen what our 6 literary elements are: the conflict, plot, characters, setting, and theme. So now you can take what you've learned and pretend that you are the author of a story and make an outline of your story, and in your outline you're going to include the conflict, plot, characters, setting, and theme of the story that you're going to tell.